An ounce of testimony is worth more than a ton of theology. A testimony is a living example of the goodness of God. They are actual people who've been saved and redeemed by the grace and love there is because Jesus is real. Michael Sewell joins the program to share his story, to share his journey of coming to faith, how he left the faith when he was dealing with corrupt leadership, how eventually on the brink of suicide, Jesus intervened and saved his life, both spiritually and actually. And not only does Michael like to share his own story, he likes to share the stories of others through his YouTube channel, Check Your Head, where he shares miraculous stories that are taking place across the world right now today that point to Jesus Christ. Michael is a very talented actor, singer. In fact, he took his testimony and turned it into a one-man musical called Heart in a Box, and it reached thousands of people with the good news of Jesus Christ simply through sharing his story. You're in for a wonderful conversation. I hope you enjoy. Please grab a cup of coffee and enjoy this episode on the Christ and Coffee podcast. Hey, Michael, welcome to the Christ and Coffee podcast. So glad to have you.
Hey, Hank, thank you for having me. Really looking forward to it.
So first question I have to ask, how do you drink your coffee?
Black like a psychopath.
Okay, fair enough. That's the way I like it too. So tell us, what do? You're in a ministry right now. You do some drama. Tell us about what you're
well,
up to.
I've been carving out my own niche for about 30 years. Right now, my current project is I'm a storyteller, and I am collecting stories of people's miracles and their testimonials of those things, and then also anything that has to do with what God's doing. And I'm not doing it like there's some of the testimonial channels like I Am Second. There's New Ink by Revolution Films. I am doing some of those stories, but it's not necessarily just a testimonial. My tagline is Check Your Head Stories, where we consider the bright side of things that can be considered quite disturbing, with tales of the miraculous, the curious, and the oddly beautiful. So I'm just doing storytelling, and it's not a apologetic approach. I just want to tell the stories, because a lot of stories are getting told out there, and I found that they were so dark. One of the big niches is true crime and horror. And I just thought they're really interesting stories, but they're very negative.
Right.
So I'm trying to do something that's different than that. But my past ministry has been traditional associate pastor. I also I help with worship leading with Pastor Odin Fong at a place called Poema. And if you're aware of the Jesus movement in the 70s, he was kind of one of the stars of that. He was in a band called Mustard Seed Faith, and then he had his own career. But I've been leading worship with him off and on for over 30 years. I was on staff with Chuck Smith and Brian Berterson at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. But mostly what I did is I did music and I wrote plays. Because when I came to Christ, I was living in New York and I was an actor, and I had just gotten versed in off-Broadway, Broadway kind of things. And so when I became a Christian, I just wanted to do ministry, and I left the whole thing behind. I left New York. I came out here to California. And then I did do a musical album, but I just felt frustrated. I thought, the songs I write are stories. They have stories with them. So I thought, I could just maybe do some skits with it. And when I go out to churches and share, and then I thought, you know what, why not just do a whole play? I had no idea that it would go anywhere. I really thought it would be just a one-off. I'd do it for a couple months, and then I'd move on to more traditional ministry. So I just started writing this play based on my testimony, and just started working out at this little church. And it was kind of amazing, because the first night there were about 30 people. They told their friends, and I changed it a little bit. The next night there were about 60 people. The next weekend there were about 150 people. And then The next night, 300 people, and then the church said, "Let's just keep doing this." People started lining up around the building, and then Chuck Smith heard what was going on. He had me come and do it for the church at large. His church at the time was very large, so there were about 4,000 people there, and it just turned into a ministry. And I kept writing plays, but that play I toured all around the world for many years. I did on mission fields. I did it at huge venues, amphitheaters, rehabs, prisons, in the bush in Africa, all throughout Eastern Europe. It just was something that the Lord.
So this is a play about your personal testimony.
Yes, that was called Heart in a Box.
Heart in a Box.
Yes.
So let's unravel this box.
All right. Okay.
What was your spiritual upbringing like?
Oh, my spiritual upbringing? Oh, yikes. Well, I came from a really dysfunctional family. My dad, they both came from West Virginia background and moved to the Rust Belt, which was very typical. But my dad, he was not the kind of guy that was going to just do the normal thing. He was very independent, and he kind of loose morals, alcoholic, kind of an abuser, but then he had this really beautiful side too, like most people that are bipolar. He did struggle with some mental illness, but he got involved with some organized crime stuff. He was kind of a numbers runner.
Oh, wow.
So that sometimes subjected our family to being at risk. And my mother, she was a sweet woman, but she had kind of a what is it? She thought of spirituality like luck. She didn't really. She'd heard about Christ growing up. I mean, there was a family Bible on the table, but open it never. So she got involved with Spiritism, and she became the neighborhood not witch but fortune teller.
Wow.
And it was kind of uncanny because she had some real power there. She was in touch with something very dark, but she thought it was great. And so she had this kind of superstitious relationship with God. But at some point, because our family was so troubled, we were, subject to sometimes even being at risk because the guy he worked with was shot in the head because he was skimming with the numbers running. There was just real darkness. My mother's supernatural kinds of connection. We had familiar spirits. Things would happen around the house that were supernatural.
What do you mean by supernatural? Like something would move from the house, or like you'd see something
would fly across the room and just smash. There would be aberrations that you would see. There would be voices. But one of the things was, well, my dad was not a faithful man at the time, but she used something called it was a pendulum kind of thing. She'd use the Ouija board sometimes, but usually her thing was either cards or the pendulum. And the pendulum told her, goes, if you go right now and open up the wallet of your husband, you will find the picture of the woman she's having an affair with. He told her the name. And so my mother went to his wallet, and sure enough, there was that picture. And then the name on the back was the name that she had just seen, that the board had told her. She confronted my father. Well, he became furious, and he got violent. Little bit of violence to my mother, but he took it out on the board. He ripped it up, and she thought, "Oh no, my connection with this spirit is broken." So she taped it back together, and it said, "Bruised but not broken," and said, "I'll continue to tell you these things." It was about that time too she became interested in reading the Bible, and she decided she was just going to read it all the way through. I don't know what it was. God was working. There were people praying for us, and she started reading the Bible. And when she got to the part about soothsayers and fortune tellers, she had never heard that this was wrong.
Right.
And
I think what the Western worldview, like, first of all, now it's becoming more mainstream to just dabble in spiritualism or supernatural. Just because you say something is supernatural doesn't mean it's a good thing, or spiritual it doesn't mean it's a good thing.
right.
Because the Bible is constantly rebuking this sort of practice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People kind of think if there's something that's supernatural, it's and if it's telling you things that are helpful, they think that's good. But that is not true. It's a deception. It's pulling you into darkness, and truly that's what was happening. But fortunately, she said, "This is wrong what I'm doing," and just on her own, she just said, "I'm going to stop doing this completely."
Wow. And how old are you when this is happening?
I was in ninth grade.
Okay.
This had happened all through junior high school. I mean, not junior high school, and I hadn't got to high school yet. But at the same time, I had some friends down the street who were Baptist missionaries to the Hispanic people in Cleveland, Ohio, Hispanic community. And so I would go to church with them on Sunday sometimes. And I started to just hear these things, and they took me to a retreat one weekend. Now, I was a rule follower, and I thought I tried to be very good. I was trying to make up for my father, who broke all the rules, and I was going to be the exact opposite. So I thought I was, I thought God liked me, and I thought I was one of the righteous people. But I became aware of the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. And when I heard that Jesus said, "Blessed are you when you bless those who curse you," I was like, what? Bless my enemies. Bless my enemies. I hate my enemies. And that's the first time I had the awareness that there was something more to righteousness than me just being a good boy. And I wasn't as good as I thought I was, but I considered myself good. But that's when I first felt conviction. And at this retreat, at the end of it, the woman who was kind of running it had written us all a personal letter, and to go out, you're supposed to go off in the woods, read this letter and consider it. And this is where the invitation to become a Christian, to be born again, was given. And God had been speaking to me on that weekend. And so I just prayed and became a Christian. And there was just a deep conviction. I was a pretty passionate kid, and I was watching my family fall apart. My dad he was very abusive, and he'd become more and more violent. My family was about to break up. His drinking had gotten out of hand, and I could see the writing was on the wall. The family was going to break up. It was just headed in a horrible direction. And I wrote my dad a letter. It was the spring, right before Easter. And I wrote my dad a letter and told him what I thought was happening, and that I was praying for him, and I wanted him to know Jesus. And the letter affected him, but he didn't immediately moved on it. But within a few days, it was Good Saturday before Easter. He went out and got completely plowed again, as he did most weekends. Came home, and he was a loud drunk. He would sing very loudly, wake up all the neighbors at 4 a.m.
Wow.
And so he came home, started singing his songs really loud. But then he felt God's conviction, and then immediately just said, "This is wrong. There's a turnaround." He started thinking of the letter. He prayed and became a Christian.
Wow.
He came in and woke my mother up, and he said, "I'm different. I'm changed." He said, I'm a Christian. Jesus just spoke to me. He woke the family up and said, "Get dressed. We're going to church Sunday morning." And so it was pretty wonderful. He showed up, and the passion and the nuttiness and the extremes he brought right into his religion, and in following Christ, he became quite what they called the soul winner. He just couldn't keep his mouth shut. He led everybody he could to the Lord. It's like he tried to lead one person to Christ a day.
Wow.
And he changed dramatically. And so that was that was background. Long answer to the one short
It's a
question.
great story, and you definitely have this gift of storytelling. So
Yes.
I like to keep I just like to listen. So your mother dabbles into New Age practices.
Yeah,
She gets saved.
yes.
You go to this retreat. You get saved through a letter, and then you
Yes.
follow the same pattern of evangelism through a letter. I'm sure there was prayers in the community. Your dad gets saved.
Yes.
So what happens after high school?
After high school, I was on my way to becoming a pastor. I went to a Christian college. And unfortunately, the churches that we'd been involved with, we just had one bad church experience after another. And I know that is a very common experience. In fact, I would say it's the norm. If you're a Christian and you're going to get involved with the church, you're going to get hurt.
Yeah.
There's going to be something that disillusions you because our expectation is so far beyond reality. And Satan does work overtime, and there are people there who are just there to disrupt and to do evil. And so, and then I think that maybe some of the expectation we have on leaders,
Right.
for them to be perfect, is just not sustainable. It's not something that any human could do. So there's some real brokenheartedness, and I began to see hypocrisy. I was becoming more disillusioned. Also, I was an artist, so I was being exposed to a lot of the really extreme liberal ideas, and some of these people that were given these ideas were the coolest people to me. I was like, they're so much cooler than the Christians I know.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, and I was like, I'm really liking that kind of community and getting accepted in that world. But some things that were unconscionable happened. I don't know how much I want to say, but just I saw some extreme immorality and some behavior that was complete mental illness, and even some crime that just gave me the ammunition to say, I don't know if this is true. And also, I was keeping the rules. I was trying to I wasn't sexual purity, the partying, didn't want to let myself do that, but I was so tempted to do it. And now I kind of had a reason to just go, why do I have to keep these rules? And it looked like my show business career was about to just take off. And I thought, what's holding me back? There's this great future ahead of me. I don't know. This is old school stuff. I am pretty old, so I don't know if these names will mean anything. But there was a fight promoter named Don King.
I know Don King.
Oh, okay, Don King.
Yeah, Mike Tyson.
Anyway,
Of course I know. Yeah.
My manager worked with Don King, and Don King was gonna finance my career and give me a record deal. And I was working with EMI Records, and then I had this girl I liked who wasn't a Christian, who was just like, she was there, and I was like, you know what? This sounds good to me. I'm gonna go be a star. I'm gonna just throw off all this stupid Christian stuff, which is full of crazy people who are doing weird things or having some fight about some doctrinal issue.
But it seemed that church hurt was pretty dramatic. It's not just like you had all the check boxes, so it was kind of a bigger wound.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that.
Yes. I mean,
but that sentiment is one of the main reasons why people don't go to church. It's statistically across the board,
Right.
like you said. Like,
you know what? That's a very important issue to me. It's one of the things that's driving me right now. This deconstruction movement.
yeah,
I listen to their reasons, and some of it is intellectually based.
yeah.
I've listened to them, and it's a good wrap up front, but once you go a little deeper, where you start to examine things a little more closely, or listen to a different voice, a lot of the arguments fall apart. But when you have when you're driven by a desire to just throw off the restraints of the Lord, you'll go for almost any argument. And I was making similar arguments, but
it's less about a logical argument, more about a personal hurt feeling.
Yes,
I find that to be the case many times. Many times.
Okay, and I mean, just so people know, the hurts were church splits are one thing.
Yeah.
And I experienced a couple of those. Doctrinal differences that are so petty in the way people set themselves against each other and make each other enemies. Well, that happened too. I mean, the first place I went was a Christian Reformed college. I was hearing this Reformed stuff, which was so different than my Baptist background, and I got confused. And I came back and I got in the middle of another fight. Also, I was involved with Pentecostal churches and charismatic churches, and then they hated the Baptists, and the Baptists hated them, and they were all wrong, and everybody's a false teacher. I was like, my head was spinning, and but this was in the mid 70s, and so the Jesus movement was very unstructured.
Right.
So it allowed for a lot of self-styled people to set up their own kinds of ministries and churches.
Yeah.
And some of those got very weird. It got out of hand. There was no biblical kind of soundness to it. There was no hierarchy of people who were wise in the faith or had any authority. Everybody just said, this is what I think and this is what I feel. And so I saw that happen. And this story is so inflammatory, but I will just bring it up, and I don't want to stay on it. But one of the events I had was I was involved with it was a small fellowship, but this man had come into town and he had found a very, very wealthy widow. And he convinced her that he was a prophet of God and that God had sent him there to her, that she should use her resources to create a ministry and set up basically it was not a shelter, but it was a place where people could go and survive the tribulation. He says, because Christ's coming back in just a few years, or maybe this year.
Wow. So
they got MREs. I don't know about Arsenal, but they had that all there. And the Pentecostal events were over the top, and they were just weird. And when I'd resist, they tell me, well, that's because you're resisting the Holy Spirit. I'd get scared and start shaking. Go, see, they say, oh, that's always one of the signs of resisting the Holy Spirit. And my mind's just getting messed up. And so I did have the fortitude to get out of that thing, but it was a few weeks later, or a few months later, that the so-called prophet killed the woman.
Wow.
And it was, he chopped her up and put her in the freezer.
Straight up demonic.
Yeah, it's completely demonic. And then the FBI got involved, and turned out he was somebody with a mental illness past, and he had escaped from an institution in Indiana and come to Ohio and set up this new thing. And so after that kind of trauma, all the reasons to leave, I just said, you know what, I can't take it anymore. Now, I will say that the Lord did surround me by people who were sound.
And he got you out of there before it got really crazy too.
But also, as I was leaving and I was just following after, because basically, I mean, T.S. Eliot says, a bit obtuse and full of high sentence. Right. That's kind of how I was. I thought, oh, I get this. I mean, this is completely for crazy people. And now I had an encounter with Jesus, so I said, well, I know there was Jesus, but this is too crazy for me, and the sacrifices are too great, and I feel so much happier as I pursue these other things. And then also, because I was involved with the arts community, I was exposed to a lot of ideas that were very intriguing to me. So at a certain point, I took a page of my Bible, I crumpled it up, put it in an ashtray, burned it, and I said, with this, I am no longer a Christian. I said, I believe.
It's like the opposite of like a kid at camp. All right, you burn your sin in the
Yeah.
fire. Yeah.
Right. So I said, okay. I said, I still believe there's something to it, but I believe it's a lower form of spirituality, and there are other higher enlightenments. And I said, from now on, I declare myself a seeker of truth. Oh my gosh, that's so pretentious, but I thought it sounded so wonderful. And I thought that would go with my upcoming record deal and my new girlfriend. All of a sudden
Are
now,
you in New York at the time, or
not yet.
Okay.
So I was like, so I started my sexual life and I had a whole new morality, and it fell apart so fast. It became clear that my record deal was mob money, and as soon as I found that out, that scared me off because I realized that's huge. And I mean, it was Carl Maduri at EMI Records. Oh, the next year, he and all of his cronies were all arrested. So It was for real. It wasn't just like, I think this is what it is. It was clearly what it was. And when I told him that I didn't want to sign that kind of deal, record deal went away. Everything just stopped. I kind of got depressed. It was a real down thing, but I thought, no, keep going. That's when I moved to New York. I went to acting school, say at Lee Strasberg Theater Institute. And it's almost immediately, it seemed like things were rolling again. I was going to have that career. And now I got very involved with Spiritism. I had a spirit guide and a daily ritual of going off with the spirit who was going to teach me enlightenment. And part of that was I never got into the heavier drugs, but I would use mind-altering substances, usually just marijuana. But I would mix it with Spiritism, and that became just my new religion. But it was making me more and more depressed. It was destroying my body. I got sicker and sicker. And even though it seemed like there were these possibilities, none of them seemed to come through. I was up for this big role or the lead in this show or this record deal. And it was just falling apart, and I got more and more depressed. And so this was in the 80s in New York. And the 80s in New York, some people consider that kind of one of the pinnacles of when pop culture was really popping there. And I was just a club kid. And then I was a club kid, and I go to auditions and then do whatever odd job I could to keep myself in a room and with food. But I was so depressed, and it was very popular at the time to take a lot of pills. And so I would go to somebody's house, because this is my plan. I gave myself a date. I said, if I don't see a breakthrough by a certain time, I just want it to be over. So for about 3 years, I pilfered pills, not that anyone would notice, Xanax, opioids, pain, all kinds of painkillers. And I had a bag that was probably about 1.5 gallons, and it was about 2/3 of the way full. And I just kept that, and I called it my exit strategy. And it was 1986, August. I had the weekend planned out. I didn't want to make cry for help. I just wanted to be dead. And so I was going to just take all those pills. But just as I was about to do that, the Lord just showed up. Now, he'd been kind of showing up in different ways over the months that I was getting closer and closer to death. An old friend named Sue, she was just a Pentecostal church girl who just always, she never let go. She kept on praying for me the whole time. She watched me walk away from the Lord, and she always just kept praying. I don't know how it happened. I probably got the only born-again Christian agent in New York City. Even in this dark place, I just kept running into Christians. And so as that Friday night came, and just as I was about to take the plunge, the Lord just really spoke to me. But it was like a a vision, not that I saw anything. It's just there was an understanding, a sense of God's presence, and I felt the Lord saying, "Don't do this. You're still my child. I've never let go of you. Come back to me now." And I did, and that darkness, that demonic spirit that had become a familiar spirit. I don't believe I was possessed, but it was a demonic presence that was always there, gone. The depression gone. I was not an addict, but that habit gone. I didn't want to have anything to do with any of that. And so my mother had figured out that I was in trouble. So she had a friend say, "Would you please go to New York and check up on him?" The next day, the friend showed up and said, "We're getting you out of New York." He said, "You're coming down to Florida. You stay there. You're gonna get healthy." He goes, "You're messed up." So I packed up. The next few months, I was in Florida, just getting stronger, closer to the Lord. And I went back to New York to try and tell people what Jesus had done, and
Wow.
It was interesting. No matter how crazy I got doing the weirdest stuff, when I came and told them about Jesus, that's when they thought I was really weird. So I did see a few friends come to the Lord, but most of them just outright have rejected it, and they were really clear about it. Like, one friend said, "Look, I don't want to be friends with you anymore." They said, "It's not because of you, because I'm rejecting Jesus, and you're part of that package, and I don't want anything to do with him. So we can't. You're no longer my friend." I'm like, well, I appreciate the honesty.
Yeah, that's wild. So you go back to New York.
Yes.
You have like I mean, I think it's interesting because you bring up a lot of interesting points in your testimony. You deconstructed, but there was a lot of this hurt.
Yes.
There was a lot of these patterns that were just still didn't get discipled or cleaned up, even though you became a Christian in high school. And then you got to this point of complete surrender at the lowest of lowest moments,
Yes.
to the point of on the brink of suicide, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So you get filled with this new sense of God has loved me this whole time, has been with me this whole time, through the ups, through the downs. He's your mother has been praying for you, your dad was praying for you. They've had their ups and downs. You go to Florida, you come back, you're in ministry and still doing the acting thing, or what are you doing?
Well, I wasn't really ready for ministry at that point. I had to get grounded again. So I was sharing with people. I was just a Christian, but I got very involved with church, and a couple really great churches there. There's a church in Brooklyn called Brooklyn Tabernacle.
I've heard of that one. Yeah,
And,
that's a great church.
I love that choir, Pastor Sewell. I mean, I left New York in 1988, but I still love what goes on there. I still listen to Pastor Sewell just about every morning. He has a devotion, and every Sunday I will listen to I watch the live cast of their service, but also I was involved with something, the local version of a Calvary Chapel.
Okay.
And I liked Calvary Chapel because Chuck Smith was somebody I had experienced in the past, and he's one person that I couldn't just completely dismiss. I always kind of I like that verse by verse Bible teaching.
How is you saw the Jesus Movement movie, the Jesus Revolution?
Oh, yeah.
Did they do a good job of portraying Chuck Smith from?
No.
No. Chelsea Grammer didn't.
No.
What do you would say would be like because you did ministry with him and you know
yes.
him. How is he not like how is he?
Kelsey Grammer played a great role. I mean, he's a great actor, and I really appreciate that movie. But Chuck was not. Kelsey Grammer's character seemed to have a little bit of self-doubt. Chuck was not that. He was, and I'm not saying harsh. It's just he was unflappable.
Got it.
And he's more in some of his approaches more like a Boy Scout, just like this. And that's he had that strength, and that's why so many people were able to trust him. Follow him. He had that strong father figure.
Got it.
He at the time people were trying to increase their sensitivity, and so he did try to be real open, but everything was, it was a challenge for him. But then once he got it, he was into it. Once he realized this is what God's doing, he was into it. But originally, he didn't really like the hippies. He called them dirty hippies. It was his wife, Kay, that would say, no, Chuck, we're going to go down to Newport Beach and sit on the beach and pray for those hippies. And he went, oh. But then when he saw what God was doing, he just said, okay, this is Jesus. And his heart just opened up. A lot of the people at the church were very conservative. They were all upset. They go, these hippies are coming with their dirty feet. They're ruining the carpet. He goes, well, then we'll pull out the carpet if that bothers you. He said, but that's what we're here for. So he was the guy to facilitate that. He was not a perfect guy. He made all kinds of mistakes. I don't idolize him a bit. He was my boss. I don't know many people that have how do you say it politely? The gusto, I'll just try to keep it nice, that he trusts other people to build him up as leaders. He doesn't feel threatened by somebody else growing or flourishing in their ministry. So that's
very rare.
Oh, yeah, it's almost impossible. But he gave so many guys that didn't deserve a platform, he gave them a platform. They did deserve a platform because God had called them, but he saw that. He really taught a lot of young men who are starting out in their ministry how to move in the Spirit. He made a lot of mistakes. He was hyper-focused on Jesus coming back immediately, and he made a few mistakes there. He had his own family struggles, but I'm really, really grateful I got to know him, and he really did help me out quite a bit, because by the time I got there, I was a broken person I had a big vision, and my heart was right, but I needed some help and some honing. I probably still do, but he was really wonderful. And he didn't just do that for me. He opened things up for so many people. So a lot of times he was so open he got ripped off, but he just counted that as the price of doing ministry.
Amazing. So very secure, very bold, very open.
Yes.
And not insecure, but
yes,
not a perfect, like everyone else. It's glad to acknowledge that.
Very flawed. But then he would turn back. He would repent, when he'd figure it out. So that's what I love about him. There was just a realness there.
He evangelized to my brother-in-law. He came to faith through his radio ministry.
Yeah.
Ended up baptizing my brother-in-law. And at the baptism, my mother-in-law and her sister also got baptized by him.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
Pirates Cove, probably.
Exactly. It was amazing.
Yes.
Thank God. So, all right. So your time in New York is wrapping up in the late 80s.
Yes.
And then where you come to California next, or what's next?
Yeah. I knew I wanted to be in ministry. At first, I thought I might do it through Brooklyn Tabernacle, and just like kind of attach myself there and learn ministry there. But
when did Brooklyn Tabernacle take off? Right around that time, or like right after that time?
Well, I mean, to me, by the time I got there in 1987, it was a pretty big church, and
so it was already big at 87. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't as big as it is now, but it was still really strong. And the Brooklyn Tabernacle, I think they already won a Grammy.
Yeah.
But no, that growth spurt, I didn't see that. By the time I got there, it was pretty big. But I will say, I think I was there right about the time Jim Cymbala really became completely the man of prayer and power that he is, because he went through a time where he goes, I'm hanging by a thread. That's how he would always describe it. And he was, you'd go and go, man, this guy, he's like, chill, dude. Because he'd be so hyper about something. And I didn't realize the things that he was facing, and especially he was torn up because his daughter had gone wayward big time, and he was just torn up. The church was always facing financial struggles, and his emotional makeup is he felt all these things, and he would cry and be like in a fetal position before he'd come out and minister, and then he just had this breakthrough, and I think that's when he became really powerful in prayer. And of course, he wrote a book called Fresh Wind, Fresh Fire, which about in the late 90s really took off in the evangelical world, and it did awaken a new move of people praying, like they hadn't before. Unfortunately, we're not seeing that continue right now, but that's because prayer is one of the hardest disciplines and sacraments of our faith, because it's so powerful, but it's also so understated. It requires you bring yourself so much to it that just in ourselves to have life be that big every day is tough. And also, I do believe there is a great spiritual opposition to it. Yeah. Anything that the dark
I always feel resistance before every prayer meeting, but after every prayer meeting, I'm like, I'm so glad I went.
Yes. And I mean, even praying, there's always a little bit of like, this is a little awkward.
Yeah.
I mean, even when we open up in prayer, you go, would you open in prayer like, oh, yeah, performance anxiety, feeling stupid things that have nothing to do with what's going to happen. You're meeting with God. But yeah, that's one of the things that I'm sad that is not more prevalent. I hear of so many pastors talk about, we have our prayer meeting and there's 5 people. Our church has 5,000. People just don't come. They don't see the value in it. And it's hard to keep that vision. It is by faith. And I would say right now we're having a little bit of a famine when it comes to faith in our country. Not so in other places.
Right. And you collect testimonies of different of stories.
Yes.
What are some of the stories that you've uncovered? Because a lot of the stories seem to be from overseas too, not just locally.
Yes. Oh my gosh, there's so many. And the channel is Check Your Head Stories. And so if you're going to do a YouTube channel anyway, if you're going to be a creator, everybody goes through these cycles of, I can't do it. There's all these reasons, and you go through this fight, and they call it the war of art. There's a book called that, but it's hard to do art because art just demands so much of you.
You expose yourself to,
and you have to have this hyper focus. And I find that if I'm going to do something artistic, it's a great way to get my house clean or get the car, detailed, or I can't possibly, work on a script or something if the toilet seat needs changing, it's like, so I'd say that prayer is one of those things. But yes, I'm telling these stories, and oh my gosh, they're so wonderful. So which one should I pick? Last week, I posted this miraculous story that came out of Gaza. Missionary underground Christian organization that works in Gaza was there, and I don't want to politicize this at all, because there's horrible things happening in that conflict. It's gone for thousands of years. The back and forth is horrendous. But some of the missile strikes in Gaza left a lot of men without their families, and their children were killed. And so same happened on the other side. Just so I don't stir anything up. Yes, the atrocities and the human suffering, that's what I'm speaking to. It's been weighed out back and forth, but these men, they'd pretty much lost everything. And so the Christian ministry brought them into a safe place. They washed their clothes, they gave them food, and they read the Bible to them, and they were praying for them. And after a couple nights, I think it was November 9th, 2023, over 200 men had the same dream. And they woke up, and all of them had been visited by Jesus, the man in white. He told them about this way of salvation, and all the men wanted to know more about Jesus. And so this is not a rare event by any means throughout the Muslim nations. My friends who are missionaries over in the Middle East, just where there's a huge Muslim population, the Christians that come, or the converts that come from the Muslim community, they become Christians. Over half of them, with empirical evidence, said, "Did you have the dream of the man in white?" Jesus is appearing to people in the Muslim nations in dreams, and that's how so many of them are becoming Christians. And I can't remember who gave the quote, but it says that this is the largest in mass conversion of Muslims to Christianity they've seen in 1400 years. It's never been like this.
200 men.
Well, those 200 men, I don't know if they all became Christians, but all of them came back and they wanted to know about Christ. And
that's interesting too,
yes,
because people could experience something supernatural or see Jesus in a dream, but that doesn't necessarily mean a conversion.
Right.
Yeah.
But that event that happened in November 9th last year is not unique. It's happening all over.
So this dream thing happened last year, or
last year.
Last year, 2023.
Yeah, just a few.
I'm blanking that we were in 2024.
About 2 months ago. 2 months ago.
2 months ago. Okay.
So that's the latest one. So that's one. Then I'm also telling stories of people that have had demonic encounters. One of my favorite stories that I think needs more attention is one that I personally know because in 1998, I think. Yeah, 98. I was on a mission trip. Also, it was a relief trip with Safe Harbor International. We went over to South Sudan. South Sudan, horrible war. The North is coming in, and it's so complex because the tribes in South Sudan fight with each other.
Right.
But when they're not fighting with each other, the North comes in and fights with them as well.
It's a huge mess, and they just threw money into the situation, and it just made everything worse, and it's a disaster. Yeah.
And there's the SPLA, the Sudanese People's Liberation Army in the South. And that's one of the factions that's fighting the North. But the North is completely confusing too, because some of the armies are coming in with different motivations. And then there's the hired militia. And the hired militia is made of those kids that have been taken from their homes and beaten, and they have to kill their family members. They lose all consciousness. They have a psychotic break, and that's the kind of soldier they're there. They're almost inhuman. They don't feel human emotion because they have been trained and brainwashed and conditioned to be that fighting machine.
Wow.
And so there was a family there in a village that the father was the leader of that village, and he had a family across the riverbed. He had actually 3 different families, but 2 of them lived across the riverbed. But there was one family in particular that he was staying with. His wife was about to give birth. In fact, the morning that I'm going to reference, she went into labor. But in that culture, it's like, oh, you're going to have a baby today? Great. I'm going off to work. So he would go under the magnolia tree and meet with the men, have tea, and then they would go do whatever work they did. But sometimes the work was just discussing things. It's a different culture, and there was nothing in their culture that considered that wrong. And the oldest daughter, she slept in a little bit, which means she woke up like half hour after everybody else, but still early in the morning. And she could see her mother was in labor, but it didn't seem too bad. She starts to make breakfast, and then someone comes screaming through the village, run now, drop everything, get out, the soldiers are coming. across the village, across the riverbed, the two other villages that were kind of sister villages had been attacked and were being burned, and most people were being killed. And then a flood of people start running into the village. And this little girl, Rebecca, she started to run off to get her father. The mother was in pain. She got the father. They came back. They only had a little bit of time. And so they said, okay, the women and children go here. The men go here. And the elderly men go with the women and children, because that's always the strategy. It sounds like he's abandoning, the men are abandoning the women, but actually it's the best strategy because it gives the most chance for survival. So Rebecca, because she was the oldest, she had 8 brothers and sisters that were younger, 7 brothers and sisters that were younger, and her mother, who was in labor, and then the other family caught up with them from across the village, some of those people. So they started to run. They went to the riverbed, which was dry because it was a drought. There were roots that had grown up, and when the river was there, the roots were underwater, but now it kind of made a covering. I said, we'll just go hide under there. While they're running, the mother's water breaks, and she falls down to the ground, and this 8 or 9-year-old Rebecca has to carry her mother while she's taking these toddlers and trying to get them to this place of safety. And they get there and they can hear the village just being massacred, the screams, they can smell the burning. They're so afraid. And at that point, Rebecca and her sister started talking. Said, are we going to make it out of this? And she said, I don't know. But she said, I heard I can pray. And she prayed to Satan.
Wow.
Now, over there, Satan isn't like the evil. They pray to many gods.
Like one of many.
Yeah, he's like, oh, and I heard he's powerful, and if you get his favor, then he'll help you because he's really powerful. So she prayed to Satan, and as soon as she prayed for Satan, they could hear that the village attack was ending. Seemed like the militia was moving on. But then 3 men came out to the riverbed, and they were looking around. Apparently, they knew who they were looking for. They were looking for Dang, her father's family, because they had a specific axe to grind with him. They saw the family go, there they are. They ran, and they started open fire. 6-month-old killed from one of the other mothers. The 6-year-old boy killed. Her brother started to run, and they shot him in the head. And then her mother was just about to push, and they came and they shot her, and they killed the baby in the womb. And Rebecca just sat there with blood all over her, screaming. And her mother's, they're about to die. She says, Rebecca, run. You've got to help. You've got to go tell your father what happened. And she starts to run, and they shoot her in the tibia. They shatter 4 inches of bone, and she doesn't know what's happened. She thinks she just hit a rock, but she falls down, and now she's bleeding, and her brother's dying. Say, please come get me out of the sun. And she tries to crawl to him, and she can't. And then she's able to crawl back to her mother, and she holds her, and for hours her mother just sat there, and she dies in her arms, or she's getting close to death. She sees, I think, 8 of the 12 were killed in that massacre. And she just was there for hours, and she thought, well, I'll probably just die here eventually. But then her father shows up, and he sees what's happened. And he's got 2 men with him, and he's weeping. And there were 2 survivors, and the mother was still alive, but he said, she's not going to last. I'm going to have to leave her here to die. Rebecca was carried out, and the other survivor were carried out, but pretty much I thought she was going to lose her leg. And her father had to, he left the family, left her in care. They got her to a Red Cross pop-up kind of MASH unit in a place called Locachoquio. And they said, yeah, we're going to have to amputate the leg, but we can't do it here. We'll just bandage you up. She didn't know where she could go back to. There was no mother. Their father was, he's out doing whatever he was doing, the war and the cattle. And so she happened to have a distant relative there in Locochokio at the MASH unit. Said, you'll come with us. And her distant relative was a Christian. Now, Rebecca had never heard about Christianity, but she said, you pray and God will help you. He will save you. And so they took her back to this village, and it just was getting worse and worse. She injured her leg even more. She couldn't get around a crutch. And there, if you can't move, you can't survive. I mean, there's no electricity, there's no plumbing. I mean, it is the bush.
Yeah, I don't think we could wrap our mind around it unless you visit.
No.
Yeah.
There's not even, like, it's kind of like this. No, there's nothing like it. And if you can't go get water every day and go several miles to get water, you're going to die. So they knew she wasn't long for this world unless something miraculous happened. But her distant aunt said, you keep praying. And one day they heard a plane go over. They said, Rebecca, your salvation has come. Well, that plane was part of the little group that I was in. We had done about 2 weeks in a place called Mario Bay. And, Tonge. But we come to this little village called Mario Bay that was right next to where Rebecca was. So the men of the village, they'd kind of fashioned this chair that they could put poles through and carry her around, because otherwise she never got out of her bed. So they put the poles on their shoulders, and 8 men came, 4 at a time, and then they were running over rough terrain. When one would get tired, then the other would jump in. And we had just landed. We were under a magnolia tree, and we saw this young girl. She was Dinka, very tall. Even at 9 years old, they're real tall, because that Dinka people they get up. They're 7-feeters easy. And so we saw this really stunning black girl, just dark, with this radiant face being carried on the shoulder. We thought, was this the queen or something? But then we realized, we could see the bandages, comes in, said, yes. And they explained in the language, she goes, this is what happened. You've got to save her. And one of the doctors, who were with Doctors Without Borders, he said, yeah, he looked and he goes, this is bad. He goes, she's not going to survive. Not only is the leg going to survive, but she's in a bad way. We need to get her out of here. So we couldn't take her on our plane out. That would have been certain paperwork had to be done, right, in order to work with the SPLA. But Pastor Gary Kusnoki, who I was with, he got her out, and so they took her to a hospital in Nairobi, and they took the X-ray and said, yeah, that leg's got to come off. 4 inches of bone missing. So they said, but there's some infection. We're going to send you back to the missionary house. You take this, and they've set the date for the amputation. So she got back to the house. Now, by this time, of course, our team had long since gone home. Pastor Gary was back in California. But the people running the missionary house called up and they said, we're having a problem with Rebecca. We can't get her to stay still. She just keeps getting up. He goes, well, just take away her crutch. Go, no. We took away her crutch. She gets up and she's walking around. They said, no, she can't walk around. She has no bone in her leg, so it's just dangling there. Go, nonetheless, she's walking around. So I said, this doesn't sound right. So we take her back to the hospital and in Nairobi, make the trip over there and see what's going on. Well, they took her back and they took an X-ray, and the bone was completely restored.
Wow.
4 inches of bone completely restored. And she didn't have to have an amputation. She was completely better. She came back here, and Gary and Carol Kusnoki adopted her. And of course, she had a lot of trauma to work through, but she really came through really well. She healed up. She became just a healthy, wonderful person. And so it so happened that Gary, who does a lot of this relief work, he ended up on a flight next to a congressman because it was just a weird experience. He had a bad, they gave him something with shellfish. He had a shock reaction, an allergic reaction. They had to land the plane, so they put him on another plane, and they upgrade him, so he ends up in first class, and he ends up next to a congressman. They start chatting. He tells them some of the work he's doing in Rwanda. He's telling them about his family because he's adopted this girl. And the congressman gets so moved that he said, I need to know this story. He said, would you come? There's a congressional subcommittee, and we're finding out about war crimes in Sudan. I want this story there. And so Rebecca, Gary came and testified in front of the congressional subcommittee. And due to that, the United States got involved with negotiations in Sudan. They were able to broker a ceasefire, a truce. In truth, this civil war has gone on for hundreds of years, but this particular skirmish had gone on for over 3 decades. And so they got this squared away. All of a sudden, Sudan goes into peace. And then after 5 years, the south of Sudan was able to vote to become independent, and a new nation was born. The latest nation in the earth is South Sudan, and Rebecca's story has a lot to do with that. So now she still, because of her heritage, she has some land there. She would like to go back eventually and start a school and a missionary outreach. So that's quite a miracle.
Praise God for that.
Yes.
And it's amazing that you're capturing these stories, because sometimes the story is all you need. You don't need to theologize. Right. You don't need to justify. You don't need to typecast some certain characters to make the narrative fit. And I feel like so much of Christian art, I think less so now, but definitely earlier, they would like just pigeonhole certain personalities where there wasn't this ambiguity of good and evil in a person. It would just be like, all right, you're a good guy, you're a bad guy.
Right.
And they would create these artificial stories. But God creates these amazing testimonies.
Yes.
And
yes.
I love the expression, an ounce of testimony is worth more than a ton of theology. Just share the story and let the story convert people. Let the story encourage people. Let the story point people to Jesus Christ. Let the story be a testament to who God is.
Yeah.
And I love this ministry you have, and you have this real gift of storytelling.
Yeah. And then I know a lot of your viewers are in New York. Well, one of my opening story, I opened on 9/11. That's when I launched. And I told the story of John Morbido, the miracle stories that are around him. So a lot of New Yorkers were very interested in that. That one got a lot of controversy, but it was, he was one of the firefighters there. He experienced the miracles. And then some of the other things I'm talking about on a different realm is...
Where could people listen to your channel? What is it again?
On YouTube, it's Check Your Head Stories.
Check Your Head Stories.
And it has to be, you have to add stories. If you go Check Your Head, you're going to get Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Okay.
But so you got to put stories there, which Red Hot Chili Peppers,
not too bad. This is background noise music.
Yeah. But I do have the podcast too. I haven't really developed that much because I want to change the format a little bit, but I'm kind of just getting started with this. But another thing that I'm really excited about is some of the stories of demonic things and scientific views into demonology and exorcism. And like right now, there's one of the buzzwords is we're dealing with narcissism. You hear that in our culture a lot of times, and it's really interesting to see the demonic connection to what we call narcissism. Like, oh, this is interesting. So one of the things I'm looking for is, can a narcissist ever truly repent?
That's a lot of psychologists say it's not possible. You just got to maintenance. But
I asked a friend of mine and I said, have you got a biblical example? He goes, well, how about King Nebuchadnezzar? I'm like, oh yeah. I mean, pretty extreme for him to leave his narcissism. He had to live like a beast, but I was like, yeah, he did have repentance, didn't he? So, Christ can do all things.
Stuff.
Yes.
As we wrap up right now, is there one thing you would like to share to the church? If something on your heart to share, just one message real quick, what would you say?
Oh, I would say that we have to have a return to holiness. We have a new kind of acceptance of just not realizing our calling, our vision. and for that vision for seeing what God wants to do and to awaken that calling and to awaken that sense of mission. And I don't mean a sense of mission that you just drum up, but let the Spirit birth beautiful things in you and speak to you on a daily basis, to have your connection with the Lord be so everyday, so organic that you're hearing things in the Spirit, and then do you have the bravery to step out? And also, don't be afraid to be wrong. And if you're wrong, cool, that's all right. You don't have to feel ashamed.
Own it.
Yeah, own it, and then just trust and see what the Lord has, and also don't be afraid. My scripture for this year, at the beginning of the year, I really felt, and that doesn't happen to me every year, but something I feel like the Lord gave me for this year is Philippians 1:28, and it says, "Don't flinch at the attack of the enemy." This is a paraphrase, kind of a mix of Message, New Living, all of them. Don't flinch at what the enemy is doing, and that will be a testimony to the world and the kingdoms of the world and to the satanic realm of the victory that's coming. And if you stay strong in that the enemy will tremble and the world will know about a confidence and strength you have for the victory that is definitely coming in Christ.
Amen. Don't flinch.
Don't flinch.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for watching to the end of this Christ and Coffee episode. Please like us, subscribe, follow us, and tune in next Wednesday for a brand new episode of the Christ and Coffee podcast. God bless you. Have a great week.